Your brain is fascinating when it comes to remembering words. Some stick immediately and stay forever, while others seem impossible to remember no matter how often you review them. The forgetting curve, spaced repetition, context-dependent memory, passive and active vocabulary. There is a lot we will get into today. And at the end of it all, you will make any word stick as easily as curse words do. Yes, there's a reason why these are usually the first words we learn in any language. In this video we look at why you remember some words and not others, and lots of strategies to solve that problem to get your language skills to the next level. After all, vocabulary is probably the most decisive factor for understanding and holding conversations. Let's start with how your brain actually forms and retains memories of words. It's called the forgetting curve, and it shows you how quickly we forget new information if we don't review it. Within just 24 hours, we typically forget about 70% of what we've learned. This is why writing a word 100 times in one sitting or cramming vocabulary before a test works for that specific test, but it won't develop your language skills. It simply doesn't work long term. Your brain doesn't form strong connections through this kind of intensive, isolated practice. Instead, it needs spaced repetition, encountering a word multiple times over larger, increasing intervals. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all words follow this forgetting curve equally. Some words stick much better than others, and it's not random. Let me give you an example from my Japanese learning. Among other tools, I'm using the popular Core 2.3 KDEC in Anki to build some base vocabulary. Anki is great for this spaced repetition approach, because its algorithm will show you cards at the right moment and you don't need to think about when to review a word. One problem I keep running into though is that very early on it throws different kanji combinations at you that all essentially mean the same thing. I totally lack the nuance to know when to use which one. And I won't learn that nuance either by repeating these words in isolation over and over again. The only way to truly understand the differences between these words is by seeing them in new and different contexts. So this isolation of words is something I really don't like about flashcard apps like Anki. And I'll probably quit it sooner rather than later and focus completely on input-based learning. Yes, each flashcard gives me a sample sentence, but let's be real, I'm just learning the word itself, not its usage. That said, this phase might be necessary, especially for a language like Japanese. Without learning these kanji combinations, I won't be able to read even beginner material, which would severely limit my input options to audio only. This goes both ways, by the way. I definitely haven't discovered all the 643 uses of verbs like echar. Some Spanish words can seemingly mean absolutely anything and everything. And to really understand their usage, only lots of varied input will help. So what makes words actually stick? Let's look at several factors here. First is context, which we are already talking about. Your brain forms much stronger connections when a word is surrounded by meaningful context rather than sitting in isolation. This is why getting lots of input is actually natural spaced repetition. Languages have spaced repetition baked into them.
How do you retain vocabulary without using some sort of spaced repetition system? Just studying the language is spaced repetition, if that makes sense. I see, so you sort of rely on watching an input as a way of seeing words repeatedly? Yeah, like if the word's important, it's going to pop up a lot, you know? If the word is not important, then I'll learn it when I want to or something. If it's some shit like, there's so many words like, here, I'll watch a little. These words are all pretty common, so you'll learn these.
Gutes Frühstück, also mein Partner und ich machen immer dann
All these words are going to pop up very often.
ausgiebigen Brunch.
Maybe this adjective isn't going to pop up very often, but it's interesting, so I might remember it, because I'm like, oh, ausgiebig, like extensive, that's kind of cool. Trying to give you examples.
An manchen Wochenenden wird dann die Familie besucht.
Again, these are all very common words, so they're going to appear all the time if I listen to German, watch German videos a lot. You don't need spaced repetition because the language itself is spaced repetition. Very smart. Yeah, that was deep, yo. That was deep. Don't let someone fucking steal that, dude. I'll be pissed. That's like my quote, okay?
When you encounter words naturally through input, you're not just seeing the word. You're seeing how it's used, what it connects to, what situation it appears in. This makes it much easier to understand the word fully and to remember it. That's why I built Lengia differently from other language learning apps. Instead of traditional flashcard repetition, which you can still do, it uses a context-based spaced repetition system. Something I honestly haven't seen anywhere else. Words you need to review naturally appear in new stories generated for you, or in articles you want to read or listen to that get simplified to your level. This way, you're always seeing words in fresh, meaningful context, not just in isolation or with the same phrase. This goes beyond pure memorization and lets you really acquire the language naturally. Emotional connection can also help a lot to make new vocabulary stick. There's a reason why curse words are often the first words we learn. They carry emotional weight. When you learn a word through a funny moment, an embarrassing situation, or an exciting conversation, it's much more likely to stick than when you learn it from a vocabulary list with a random phrase and random picture attached to it. I noticed that to me, the familiarity with sound patterns plays a huge role. When I started learning Japanese, some words' sound pattern was completely foreign to my German-English trained ear. These words were much harder to remember. There's also a big difference between passive and active vocabulary. You might recognize a word perfectly when reading or listening, but struggle to use it in conversation. This is completely normal. Active vocabulary is always smaller than passive vocabulary, even in your native language. To make vocabulary stick forever and move it into your active vocabulary, you need to actually use it in conversations or writing, which directly leads me to the first practical tip. Create your own sentences. Instead of relying purely on pre-made examples, make your own ones and make sure they're ones you would use in real life. For example, when learning the word toilet in a new language, figure out how to say, "Where is the toilet?" That's way more useful than "the toilet is white." Either make the sentence personal and relevant to you, or make them absurd. Maybe you're learning the word fat and, well, your cat is a chunky boy. So you know what sentence to make and it will stay with you. Or just think of a mom joke. Getting creative here does not only help a lot and activate the word much stronger because you're engaging with it, it's also pretty fun. This becomes even more important with more abstract words. It's often relatively easy to memorize concrete words like manzana because you can picture what an apple looks like or even what it tastes like. But abstract concepts are often much harder to deal with. Personal sentences can really shine here. Take the Spanish word aunque. It's an important conjunction, but pretty abstract. Instead of memorizing its definition or direct translation, you can simply come up with an example sentence that applies to you. For example, I could say, aunque soy alemán, hablo español. Now the word is tied to something personal and meaningful, rather than just floating around as an abstract concept. The personal or absurd method is even used by memory champions. You know, those guys who can memorize a deck of cards within a minute and much crazier stuff. The World Memory Championship is less a test of memory than of creativity. The crazier, the better. I can recommend his book Moonwalking with Einstein as well. Even the title encapsulates this whole idea. However, while these memory techniques can be useful to some vocabulary, they're not necessarily the best tool to language learning as a whole. Creating elaborate memory palaces for every word you want to learn would be exhausting and impractical. Plus, it misses the most important aspect we talked about earlier, which is context and natural use. This brings us back to consistency and spaced repetition. If you're taking a language class for an hour once or twice per week, I very much doubt you will make significant progress unless you engage with the language almost daily outside of class. Your brain needs regular exposure to form lasting connections. This is also why extensive exposure is better than intensive study sessions. Reading 10 pages daily across the week will serve you better than reading 70 pages in one sitting. To keep your consistency, it's important that you find your right level of difficulty. If you study flashcards, don't do 100 new ones per day, you will just burn out. And with your input, find material that is slightly above your level and, most importantly, interesting to you. We want to spend most of the time in the zone of proximal development, where the material is challenging enough to learn from, but not too difficult so that it becomes frustrating. I try to bake this into Lingia as well and continuously improve it. You can set how challenging you want your content to be, plus you can focus on specific aspects you want to improve, like certain tenses or vocabulary themes. This works great once you reached a low intermediate level. If you're a complete beginner, it's probably not the best tool for you yet. As you start to progress, you can also start to learn your target language in your target language. Sounds a bit weird, but it makes a lot of sense. If you're learning Spanish, for example, your flashcards could be Spanish to Spanish, not Spanish to English, with relating concepts and definitions on the back of the card. This helps you build stronger connections within the language itself through synonyms and context, rather than always routing through your native language. So to round this up, you should use monolingual dictionaries more than translators. You can start with bilingual resources, but as soon as you can understand basic definitions, switch to a learner's dictionary in your target language. The definitions there are usually written with simpler vocabulary, making them perfect for this transition phase. Let me give you some bonus tips for some specific type of words. Cognates are your friends. Cognates are words that look similar across languages. For example, information and información. Train yourself to spot these patterns and you get instant vocabulary. The concept of language transfer is very powerful and useful here, and I'll make a video about that in the future. But if you can't wait, just Google it. With compound words, it's useful to understand the components. In German, Krankenhaus is literally sick house. Once you know this pattern, many compound words become easier to remember and give you sort of bonus vocabulary in case you didn't know one of the components beforehand. Another example would be Fahrzeug in Germany, which is literally just driving thing. And I noticed that this pattern also exists in Japanese. Food is eat thing, drink is drink thing, and an animal is of course a move thing. So if there is some magic trick to remembering vocabulary, it's to engage with the language in a more meaningful and personal way, consistently and in actual context. And if you want to know how to turn all this vocabulary from passive knowledge into active use, check out my video about making the transition from input to speaking. I break down how to overcome that frustrating stage where you understand everything but struggle to express yourself. Thank you for watching, and I see you next time.